Hello everyone and welcome to the International Ecommerce Day, the third edition. I'm here with David Darmanin from Hotjar. He's our first speaker. A few things about him before I will give the scene to him. I've met this awesome guy 3 years ago in Malta. We were starting to do our startups, addressing the market. We were like some small players in a big ocean of opportunities. And David and I, we've shared our plans, our visions. Both of us were pissed off about the lack of know-how in the market, and also the lack of proper tools to address the real needs of e-commerce marketers. So here we are, 3 years after. He has made a far better job than I've done, but we are actually delivering value, and I'm always admiring the perseverance and the way he's delivering value through his product. So I must say, David, that you are truly a source of inspiration for me. So without further ado, David, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Valentin, and thanks for the kind words. I think that was a little bit too modest of you. I'd say, first off, huge thank you to Omniconvert for putting together the International Ecommerce Day. This is fantastic, especially since I'm actually very passionate about e-commerce, and actually at Hotjar, most of our customers are actually e-commerce. It's actually our biggest segment, so this is brilliant. Really, really excited to be here. Obviously, big well done to Valentin and his team for putting this together. And yeah, I want to mention Joanna and Alex, who helped organize this and also help get me all set up. So yeah, shall we kick off? We're going to talk about the 5-step action plan of how to jumpstart the growth of your site.
Sure. So David, you just need to share your screen, and then we're all set.
Brilliant. So let's get going. Screen share. Let's see, we should have the feed at this point. There we go. Fantastic. So obviously it's a 5-step action plan to jumpstart the growth of your site, but today the focus is definitely going to be on e-commerce. But to be honest, that is always the case with me. As I said, it is the area I know the most, and it's actually it's kind of the type of company that uses Hotjar the most. So what are we going to be talking about today? So the 5-step action plan is quite simple. We're going to start by talking about empathy, right? It's a word that I kind of believe a lot in. So we're going to look at why is it powerful, and we're going to look at, are you really doing these things, and tips that basically allow you to be more empathic. Then we're going to look at what's the best way to find the biggest hole in your leaky bucket. We're going to look at what's the best way to analyze your key pages. And then we're going to end with surveying, one of the most unsexy things ever, but hopefully today I'm going to inspire you to create some really actionable surveys you're going to get results with. And then we're going to end with some quick wins, right? So things that are maybe less work than 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of you might have heard of them before, but we're going to look at in detail how you can go out and get some quick results. Okay, so let's kick off. Before we jump into the actual topic, obviously, Valentin already gave some background about me, but it's important that you know where this information is coming from. So even before Hotjar, I was, as Valentin said, involved in the industry for a long time. I did loads of tests across a lot of different industries. And then later on, I created Hotjar purely because there wasn't a tool that I felt could allow me to do the job how kind of I wanted to do it, right? Something simple, easy to use. But today we're not going to be talking about Hotjar, right? Obviously, it does influence what I say because I've learned a lot from Hotjar, but we're going to be really talking about, more importantly, the things that you can do to kind of get results for your site. But I think it's important to do that, to kind of quickly look at my evolution, like the experience I went through, and why I'm saying the things I'm saying today. Right? I like to call this perspective. So In terms of testing, if I look back, this was probably around a decade ago, right? 10, 11 years ago, or even more now. We're starting to get a little bit old. But in the very beginning, for me, testing or optimization was all about element styling, colors, the size of things, how to position them. And it was really kind of the very beginning, right? So some of you might be doing this, and there's nothing wrong to be here. But I think if anything, if your tests or the type of optimization you do is limited to this, then if anything, the takeaway of today is there's much more that you can do, right? The second phase that I then moved into was focusing more on what should the layout of the page be? And so doing this is so-called multivariate testing, right? This was a long time ago. Multivariate was quite sexy back then. So it's this idea of you put in loads of things into the page. So 5 different headlines, 4 different hero shots, 6 different subheadlines, 10 different paragraphs, and then you let this kind of simple algorithm find the winner for you, right? But what we found was that we did get some wins with this, but it quickly ran out. It was very time consuming and it wasn't very effective in the long run. This was the point where I was looking for, I had built a team and we were looking for, okay, how can we really get better results, right? And this was when I started to look at the people, the masters who did copy, right? Copywriting, persuasion tactics that we're going to look at a little bit later on, and focusing on doing more tests, right? More velocity. And while this worked, what we found was that we were getting less wins. So if there was a win rate for, let's say, every 10 tests we were doing, we were getting less wins because we were so focused on velocity. And the win rate was also smaller. So the win size was actually smaller as well, which means you have to run your tests for longer, right? So the final stage, and this was the point where this is what really made me want to build Hotjar, was where I started to realize the awesome power of doing user feedback, right? So listen to your users and basically let that inspire what you're going to do next, right? Understand their frustrations, what stopped them from converting or what converted them, what other solutions did they look at, right? What's their mental mindset at that point? And basically use that to put more thought into the tests, which means you do less tests, but you get bigger wins, and this worked. And again, this is what brought me to Hotjar, right? I needed a tool that would give me kind of that input into what to test. So what did I learn, right, in this long journey in all these different phases? Yeah, I'd say the big first lesson is this: best practices suck. I think if you Google this with my name, there's an interview I did, which I quite enjoyed, where we talked about how there's so many marketers out there, right? Some of them might be on this call as well, and we know what we're talking about here. That we're all creating blog posts, so people do backlinks to it, or people share it. But the reality is it's all about kind of listing all the things that you should do. And the reality is, just like this cartoon here, not every site is the same, right? We're not all selling the same thing, and we sell things in different ways. So the idea that what worked for you should work for me is completely insane, right? Obviously, we can learn from each other, but in the end, it's so important to focus on who your users are and who your customers are, right? Because they are very particular to your business. The second thing I learned, especially when consulting some really big businesses and even startups, is that there is simply too much data, right? And even just looking at the stack we use at Hotjar, there's so much data that we pretty much kind of can't keep up with it. And it's sometimes difficult to know, what do we do with this data, right? So this 5-step action plan we're going to look at today, it's going to tackle this, right? Where do you focus on? What do you prioritize on? And finally, right, interesting, this is coming from the CEO, from a CEO that kind of builds software, but actually the best tools are free, right? So thank God, no one has yet created like a subscription service around the ability to hear, listen, and observe, right? To understand your customers and users, to speak to them, to understand what is frustrating them and what are they looking for, and what do they like and dislike, right? Nothing really beats this. And then the final lesson is that you really need to focus on the big picture, right? Because there is so much data, because there is so much going on, it's so easy to get tactical. It's so easy to think, oh, best practice, let me add this, let me do this and add this to the page, and maybe this will boost, maybe we'll do a discount, or this headline is going to change the game, right? All these things are important in the big picture, but you need to have that big picture, right? The example I like to give is, if you're playing chess, you cannot make your next move if you're not seeing the full board. And yet, time and time again, I work with teams, I speak to teams, I advise startups where they're just focusing on the small tactical things and not the big picture. So I developed this over the years, which I like to use a lot, and I've shared it as part of kind of us giving away free content at Hotjar. It's part of what we call our action plan. It's basically this idea that everyone coming to your site is coming for a reason, right? And typically the reason is not obvious. So you might think they're here to buy a drill, right? But if they're buying a drill, it might be that they're looking to buy a hole in the wall, right? Or they're looking to buy a picture on the wall, if you know what I mean, right? So, so as a marketer, a site owner, as an analyst, optimizer, you need to understand what that drill is going to be used for, right? What is bringing them there, right? Is it their job? Is it a role they have? Is it maybe a need in the family? The more you understand the root cause of what is bringing them there, even if it's a recommendation or where they heard about you, those data points are so important, right? The second one is barriers, and this is typically what I see most people in this industry interested in, right? Why are people abandoning? Why are people leaving the site? And this is important, right? We need to know where and why people are leaving the site. Again, most people know where, but they don't typically know why. So I work with many teams that, like, I ask them, okay, so people are abandoning on this page, why? Right? Why are they leaving? And they don't know, but they can give me the different bounce rates segmented by country and all this stuff. But like, have you spoken to any user? Have you spoken to a customer that made it through this step to see what was kind of potentially scary to them? And that brings us to number 3, hooks, right? So the people that did make it through this process, what was it that really persuaded them to act? That's why we call it a hook. So the whole idea is that when you know these 3 things together, that's where you start to make informed choices about what to test and what to change. And I'm going to show you later on an example of, at Hotjar, what are these 1, 2, and 3 for us as a business and what we've done about them. So some exciting stuff there. So let's kick into these 5 steps, right? So step 1 was empathize. So why is empathy important? Because at the end of the day, if you cannot become your user, you can't think like your user, right? And if you can't think like your user, you're not going to get those big wins. It's too easy to build split tests with like internal thinking, right? You're thinking about the business, about the team. But the biggest wins come when you start to become your user. And how do you become your user? Well, the first tip I have for you is to immerse yourself. So what do I mean by immerse yourself? So ask yourself, when is the last time that you actually used your own site as if you weren't a customer and actually bought something and shipped it to yourself, right? And I invite you to do this periodically. So what I do is every now and then, I think roughly around at least every quarter, ideally every month, depending on how busy things get at Hotjar, I actually record myself signing up for Hotjar and setting it up. And the reason why I record it with a video is so easy to kind of observe something and say, shit, I really want to share this with the team, but now I don't have it captured. Or something particular happened and I don't have it recorded. So on the Mac, you can use ScreenFlow, which I love. It's desktop software. Or there's Jing, which is for PC and Mac. But there are loads of different software you have. Install it on your machine. Do this regularly. Record yourself so you can share it with the team. There's something really powerful about them seeing you use the site, actually buying and commenting as you go along. Now, you can also do this by recruiting a panel, right? So there's platforms like usertesting.com, which is a little bit more expensive nowadays, but you'd be surprised how much you can learn from just 5 people doing it. The only thing which is not ideal here is that they are not your real user. So you have to take this with a pinch of salt, right? Do not focus that much on what they're saying, but focus more on what they're doing. Where do they hesitate? Where do they get stuck? And finally, you can recruit a panel. There are tools like Hotjar which allow you to basically ask people, hey, we're going to give you like a discount, or maybe just ask them for help, right? You'd be surprised. Put in their details, choose the ones that are the best fit for what you're looking for, and then just bring them onto Skype, Hangouts, Zoom, whatever platform. Invite some people from the team and then just ask them to do something. It's very powerful to see this. And yet again, so many teams don't do this, right? Even at Hotjar, we are sometimes skipping this and not doing this as often as we can. So it's really important to challenge yourself to stay in touch and to empathize. And then finally, maybe the easiest, quickest way of doing it, but maybe the least qualitative, because you're not listening to your customers, but at least you can observe them, is recording your own users, right? So this is the idea of kind of having recordings or visitor playback. It's something that Hotjar offers, but there are, again, many tools that do it out there. But it's this idea of being able to record behavior on your site and replaying them in volume. And this is really powerful because you can literally see how your users are behaving, right? It's literally like a video. You can see here, there's like a play bar and you can actually see them behaving. And if you do this again, really important, take notes, add tags, because eventually we've been through this pain. You see a lot of recordings and you want to be able to go back and find something. You want to be able to share it. So it's really important that you spend some time kind of adding notes. And an interesting example of this was very early on when Hotjar had launched. PrestaShop was using Hotjar. It was really interesting that they had just launched a beta, and they were seeing recordings of people behaving really weirdly, and they couldn't understand why. But then all of a sudden, they started to realize that on the last step, they had this confusing field here in the bottom, create a new store, even though they've already created a new store. And thanks to recordings, they could literally see their users like stuck in a loop trying to create the store over and over. And it was interesting because in their stats, in their analytics, they were seeing amazing store creation numbers, right? But then there was no engagement. So what's interesting was, thanks to seeing the recordings, they redesigned it. Obviously, a number of people creating a new store dropped, but then the beta was much more successful. People were actually using it. So it's an example of how numbers can sometimes be misleading and why it's so important to have that qualitative, the feedback loop always present. So yeah, and then finally share with your team. Probably this is not what it's exactly going to look like, but you'd be surprised how many users, at least we have at Hotjar or our team, how they're shocked by the stuff that we discover. Typically, this is more what it looks like. This is the team at Unbounce, like sharing stuff, like the fact that you can actually show how your users are using your site with your team is incredibly powerful, right? Some of you also have clients, so your clients are e-commerce clients. This is incredibly powerful when you can actually show them what is actually happening. So yeah, the summary of this step is the first step towards optimizing your site is to see it through the eyes of your users. It might seem just like a really nice quote, but this is really fundamentally critical, right? You need to see it through the eyes of your users because it's so easy to have these blinkers of being within the company and only seeing the experience optimized and amazing as it is from your angle, right? This happens to us all. Okay, so step number 2, find your biggest barriers, right? So we looked at this in the kind of the 3-circle chart, right? Where are people really dropping off, right? So now we understand the usability, we're empathizing. And this is where the concept, the notion of funnel comes in. Now, most of you know what a funnel is and probably used it in Google Analytics or Hotjar or Mixpanel. It's a great way to see where users are dropping off, but I'm going to power through this just in case some of you don't know what a funnel is. And the whole idea of calling it a funnel really pisses me off because this idea of having 10 people on the top and 1 comes out of the bottom, where the hell did the other 9 go, right? So in a way, what I think is a much more interesting way to think of funnels is more like a treasure map, right? So in a way, because funnel feels like this object exists and you have no control over it, so fuck it, that's how it is, but you can try and kind of reshape it. But a treasure map is more about you are actually creating your funnel, your map, right? So ideally, we are leaving leaving like a cookie trail for people to follow, right? So it's really important to think of it in this way. And if you don't have a specific funnel for your site, if you're not being very like if you're not planning the route you want your visitors to take, then you should be. And you can also look at stuff like user flow in Google Analytics, which is very interesting to see how people are actually moving around, right? Especially with e-commerce and where you have a lot of products, this can be quite intimidating. So what I would suggest is don't get too granular or anal in terms of having every step, but on a high level, like what is the typical journey, right? Do your users typically start at the category page and then move to, for example, search and then product and then checkout and then thank you? Like what is that, those very high level milestones, just like we have in this map? It's really important for you to know what those steps are, and for you to start also testing and playing around with how that funnel should be designed, right? Maybe it should behave or should act in a different way. So once you have that funnel and you're starting to analyze it, the main thing to look for is obviously drop-off points, right? But you're not only looking for drop-off points, you're looking for very high volume drop-off points. And this is the prioritization game again, right? So you want to focus, just like a surgeon, on the arteries which have the biggest blockage, right? It's pointless focusing on tiny veins, right? You really need to focus on where you have the biggest problems. And in this example, you can see with Hotjar, we had so many people dropping off on the registration on the 15th, like on the very beginning. We were like shocked that this was the case. So obviously we want to watch and learn, right? So again, this whole idea of either doing user testing or actually looking at recordings of people stuck at this stage is really important. We're back to the empathy part, right? And if you're doing this, especially with recordings, like what we do is we list by the number of pages that they're looking at or the time on the page. That typically highlights the more juicy or interesting sessions. But again, there's a lot to be said about getting both strangers to do like user tests from usertesting.com and also recruiting, especially specifically from this page, recruiting people like that bar we saw before, offer an incentive, collect their details, and get them on Skype, Hangout, Zoom, right? Get them to share with you why they were stuck, what was happening. Again, connect with your user. So to summarize, optimizing is a prioritizing game. Always start with the biggest holes in your funnel. Really, really important. Step number 3. So now that we know that we are dropping off people on specific pages, what do we do to understand these pages, right? We've seen some recordings, but now we need to dig deeper. So the advice I always give is connect the what with the why, right? A perfect example is a heat map, which are so sexy and so awesome, but alone are not that valuable, right? So a heat map gives you the what, right? What are people clicking on? What are people doing? Where are they kind of hovering over with their mouse? But then the interesting is the why. So this is an example of our pricing page, right? Really, really important page for us, for our business, right? It's where people decide if they're going to give us money or not. So we ask the question here, is our pricing clear? If not, what would you change? And this is where the power comes in, where you can connect like what people are actually doing, how they're behaving, and what they're saying. And in this case, for example, we were shocked by the results because people were interacting with one aspect of our pricing, but asking questions about a completely different area. What was interesting was that when we actually then interviewed people and invited them on Skype and Hangouts and whatnot, we realized that they were completely confused about what that term meant. And this has led to a big transformation in Hotjar. And in fact, like a lot of the stuff that we learned from this question here was actually then literally we mapped them out, right? So we said, okay, 35% of people are saying, is this per domain or is this for the whole account? I'm inventing these, right? Because I don't remember the results. 20% was, do you accept PayPal, right? So we mapped out with percentages, and then we literally redesigned the page to answer all those questions. And it was like having a task list, and we were ticking them off. Okay, does the new page answer this question? Yes, tick it off. Does it sort out this? Yes. And we pretty much created a whole new experience, which is now live, right? So by the time that this slide, the new design is actually live. And it's quite interesting. Far from a perfect page. We did see some uplift in terms of signups, but not that much. But more importantly, pricing and the way Hotjar works just became much more understandable to our users, right? Who in the end of the day are the ones that count because they are the ones that are paying us, right? So notice again, very different than doing research online and looking at best practices of how to do a pricing page. We first spoke to our customers, right? And the solution might not have anything to do with best practices at all. So another thing that I recommend is ask questions based on user activity, right? So we looked at the general question we had for a pricing page, but sometimes, especially if you're not getting replies to your poll, to your surveys, adapt it to the behavior you see, right? So if you're seeing, for example, in this heat map, people like clicking and moving all over the place, like they seem kind of lost or overwhelmed, maybe ask, what's the purpose of visiting us today? What would you like to achieve, right? This is the whole drill versus the whole story, right? So dig deeper with the question, right? Is it that you want a treadmill, or is it because you want to basically change your lifestyle, or is it like David at Hotjar who's competing with his Fitbit with the rest of the team and wants to boost his stats, right? So the more you understand the story behind your potential customers, your visitors, the better you can design the experience, the better, the more winning tests you will have. If you're seeing low engagement, and let's say only specific things have engagement, so again, this means the page is not doing a good job, just ask simple questions. What's missing, right? What's the one thing this page should do? Experiment with the questions, make it conversational, and also have follow-up questions, right? Another tip that I received from Michael from Unbounce is like start with the simple question, yes and no, right? So does this page help you with your objective today? Yes, no, and do some branching logic, right? So Hotjar, we do no and then a question, yes, which probably, if you have a heat map like this, you're not going to have a lot of, could just take them to subscribe to an email or something. Sorry, to subscribe to a newsletter. And then if you're, again, seeing a scroll map like this, where we call this like the color accordion, so it's basically people dropping off a lot. If you could change anything on this page, what would that be, right? Or what's the first thing you'd like to see on this page? So again, adapt your questions to the behavior you see. And I've written a lot about all these different 8 patterns and questions you can ask around it. You can just Google 8 heat map tests. So to summarize, for the biggest wins, uncover both the what and the why. I cannot stress this enough, and typically teams always know the what, don't know the why. If you really want the big wins, combine both. Step number 4, serving your customers, right? So this is where things get a little bit difficult, because I love surveys and I used to hate surveys, and I know many people out there hate surveys purely because we think people don't answer surveys, but they do. And the reality is that typically optimizers and entrepreneurs don't usually answer surveys, but the people we're optimizing for, especially if they love what we do or are in real need for a solution, they will answer surveys. And just like a conversion rate, all you need is 10% answering a survey, right? So that's all you need. You're going to learn so many things. So reminder, with the survey, ideally, we want to try and uncover these 3 areas, right? The drivers, hooks, and barriers. So how do we do it? Now's the time to get ready to screen grab, right? So I'm going to give you a question for each, but here's a quick example of how this is useful. At Hotjar, we uncovered what our barriers are, right? By asking questions, right? So for each stage or step in our funnel where we had high drop-off points, so number 1 was registration, we asked why, and they said, oh, I don't have time. What is the value, right? So those are the things we need to optimize around. Number 2 was script not being added. Why? Again, time was an important thing, and resources, right? So again, number 3, time again, right? So again, it's so important that it might be a no-brainer, but our copy, our case studies, our testimonials, the technology around setting up Hotjar, everything has to be around time. And this has influenced actually the brand promise we have at Hotjar, which is weekly insights set up within minutes. We're not there yet, but we're trying to live up to it. So here are some questions that allow you to uncover for each, right? So for drivers, you can ask questions in one sentence, describe yourself, right? And don't make this like multiple selection or like keep it open, right? Yeah, you need to process them manually, but guess what? Hard work equals amazing results. So you need to put the work into reading these and bucketing them, right? Number 2, what are the main challenges you face on a daily basis? Number 3, what was the one main factor persuaded you to choose us? And 4, please list the top 3 biggest fears or concerns that are nearly stopping you from using us. These are my 4 favorite questions ever. And there are many more that you can ask. And just so it's clear here, you're asking your customers, right? But especially number 4, even though they are a customer, you'd be surprised how many things you're going to uncover which will allow you to convert more visitors into customers, especially because these guys are much more qualified than that random visitor hitting your site, right? Who, when you ask them why you came here, might say, oh, I'm just doing some research, or I just arrived here by mistake, right? So asking your customers, super, super valuable. So how do you get the most responses though, right? Because there are some tricks to be aware of. Many people will say, if I send this out as an email, I'm not going to get any replies. So 1, you need to incentivize, right? Give a prize, but at the same time, you need to say, you see that here on the survey here on the right, hopefully you can see my mouse, please be blunt and honest. You don't want them to think they're going to get the iPad by basically being nice to you, right? So there's an iPad to be won, or each one who replies, we're going to give you something, but we want you to be blunt and honest. You cannot offend us. It's the only way we can continue to improve Hotjar, right? Or the name of your site or whatever. Then you download the replies and you get the missing pieces by pretty much putting them into kind of columns. We've actually sharing templates of all this stuff and even the worksheet. Again, you don't need to be a Hotjar user, so this is nothing to do with Hotjar, but just Google, I think it's Hotjar resources, and yeah, we're sharing all these templates and the action plan and everything in there. It's definitely very useful. So this is the final result, right? So this is how we mapped out our whole big picture, and basically now we know top challenge, we know our top 3 personas, our big drop-off points, what persuaded people to convert in the top 3 fears, right? So this gives us this big picture, right? We are now able to make our next move and get a big win. So yeah, so this was kind of the typical example of when I saw that worksheet, and then I was looking at, remember in the funnel we had registration was the biggest drop-off point. That's the point where I had this moment. It's like, oh no wonder we have high drop-offs, because it looks like this, right? While I'm empathizing, while I'm going to sign up myself and thinking, holy shit, no wonder our users are saying this. So this is why we have such a high drop-off point, and that's what's motivated us to design, again, by the time I did these slides, our new design is already live, to build and create this whole completely new experience, which is focused more on the objections and the stuff that our users are telling us, right? So you can see that live. So to summarize, if you cannot see the big picture, you will fail to make the changes that really matter, right? The things that are really influencing your users or not. So I'm going to power through these because I know time is up. What are the quick wins I have for you today? So build up commitment, leverage social proof, kill stuff from your site, because that's typically a big winner, and give a reason why. So what do I mean by these? Again, very quickly, building up commitment, right? The opposite of this is something that looks like that, especially if you're on the sofa in the evening, you've got 2 kids close to you, and you're trying to book something. So obviously, I know that you guys don't have something that looks as horrible as this, but think about it, right? Are you forcing people to go through registration to buy something for you? How easy is it to kind of get them through, right? More importantly, how much are you helping your customers find what's important to them? Are you building an experience which is self-guiding, kind of self-service? So that's really important. And this is an example of, for example, a customer that I had helped that had a huge form, and we changed it, transformed it to show value, and made it more step by step. And yeah, it's a starter book, right? Many people who've done CRO for a long time say there's much more to this, but if you don't know enough about psychology of persuasion, highly recommend you read this book, because it talks about building up commitment. And the next topic, which is leveraging your social proof, right? Super important for you to show how many people buy from you, right? What are you selling? How important are you in the market, right? And if you don't have, go get featured, right? Build your own social proof. Even more importantly, feature your customers, right, who have that specific problem. Get them to speak about the hole in the wall in their testimonials, so it appeals to the people, to the visitors coming on your site, because now you know the drivers. Yeah, and a perfect example of Basecamp, who are always experimenting with social proof. I love how they do this elegantly. It's always changing, but yeah, it's push yourself, right? Challenge yourself to find better ways to do this in a way that is more relevant to your users, to your visitors. Kill stuff, right? Time and time again, speak to agencies, speak to professionals, consultants. Always, one of the biggest winners, the fastest wins, remove stuff people are not engaging with, right? This is a perfect example. Eliminate stuff, right? Give more white space. Perfect example. Heat maps will reveal what people are not caring about at all. And then finally, give a reason why. These two are not good examples, but I see this many times, right? Like, especially right now, like my wife and I were fixing up a new place, and we're buying a lot of stuff. So I'm looking at a lot of stores online. Why does your site exist? What makes you different, right? Why shouldn't I buy from Amazon or the shop around the corner, right? What is your story? What do you specialize in? If you don't have a reason why, you can easily become irrelevant. With Hotjar, it was our point of view, right? It's how we're building the business in a different way. It's super important for you to have that. So to summarize, 5 final takeaways: become your user, find your conversion killers, right? The only way to do it is to really become them. Challenge yourself. 2, focus on the biggest barriers first, right? Stop looking at those veins. Focus on the stuff where you're going to have the biggest impact. Connect the what with the why to get those aha moments. Get the why. Take a step back and look at that big picture, right? You have to do surveys. And finally, best practices suck, right? But make sure that you've not missed the quick wins that we talked about. And very end, actually give a shit, right? When you discover something, actually do something about it. I worked with an e-commerce customer at Hotjar, and we ran polls on their product pages, and we asked, what's how can we improve these pages? What's missing? And literally, when we saw this word cloud, which shows, like in Hotjar, like what are the words that are used the most, there was this huge word, which was weight. And I pinged the customer and said, hey, like, do you have the weight of the bikes? Because I bike a lot, right? And that's like critical. I'm like, shit, we didn't have time to do this. I was like, guys, come on, like, put on the weight, go in your warehouses, weigh them, create like a guide of, like, you put in your weight and how much storage you have, or how you use your bicycle, and recommend models. But we spoke like a year and a half ago, but still they have no weight on the site, right? So you need to give a shit, make stuff happen. And yeah, that's it. So questions?
David, thanks a lot for sharing this. So we have a few questions, and one of them is coming from Aline, which he says that he loves Hotjar, as I do as well. I've started to use it properly just 3 months ago, I mean, intensively. But he's asking that if you incentivize people to give you feedback about the product with other products than you are selling, like incentivizing people with iPhones or iPads or any other thing, he thinks that this is gonna be biased, the results. What do you think about this? Should you offer a carrot as a reward, or just ask them something?
I think it all depends on the relationship you have with your customers, right? So in our case, many of our customers, they love Hotjar. We have an existing relationship. They care about what we do with Hotjar. So incentivizing really pushes them over that hurdle of, I'm fucking busy, I don't have time for this shit. So it's just that carrot, right? From my experience, If there is bias, it's not big enough bias to influence the results. So if we weigh out bias, or at least slight bias, with getting the results that are going to move the needle, I say don't worry about the bias and just go for it. If you're super concerned, or maybe you operate in an industry where you're worried that there's going to be a lot of bias, then try doing it without it. And then if it fails, do reminders or reopen the survey. And do a prize. And in fact, one thing that we find, which like in the reminder, I like to write, you'd be surprised, right? Because everyone thinks this, like most people don't reply to surveys, right? So your odds of winning like a prize are very high. And this gets people to kind of participate a lot. But the key is in the survey to lead with that phrase, right? We need you to be honest and blunt with us because it's the only way for us to get insights. Impossible to offend us. Really, really important to use that wording.
Okay, thanks. So David, we also have another question. So,
sure.
How do you think exit feedbacks are better than welcome feedback? So something like, welcome to our website, blah blah blah, do your stuff there, and then at the end of the session we're going to ask you a few questions, or at the end of the session to simply ask them for feedback.
I've used the welcome surveys before, but to be honest, I stopped some years ago because I felt that the experience was not right. So I'm a big fan of two things, which is contextual, polls, like pop-ups. So when something happens, you actually ask them about it. So for example, with Hotjar and many other tools, you can do this, right? You can put a snippet code so that if someone, for example, adds something to a cart, you can actually ask them, right? Was that easy? Like add to cart, stupid example, but maybe it is important for you, right? Like how easy was that to do? Like how do you feel about it? Or doing like polls or surveys after the act. Right? As I said, so it's much more powerful to do it afterwards. I'm not a really big fan of the welcome surveys, but if you have the right tool where it's not too intrusive of in the experience, I say go for it. Right? In the end, any feedback is better than no feedback.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now let me ask you another question from a user perspective. So let's presume I've just installed Hotjar. So people, to remind, we've just integrated our tools so that now you can do A/B testing and you can see the heat maps and session recordings for each variations of your A/B tests. I've started to use it on our pricing page because we are now doing a variation, hiding all the prices or showing off the prices, because the hypothesis is that people are actually onboarded much more easier if they don't see the prices. So how do I use Hotjar? So what is the best?
That's a great question.
To use Hotjar to get value for your e-commerce website?
Yeah. So most split testing tools nowadays allow you to quickly, like, obviously inject script or like tag the variations. Some tools like Omniconvert like actually integrate with tools like Hotjar, so you can actually see recordings of the different variations. So I would say, I know this is pushing it, but especially if you have traffic, I would actually ask ideally the same poll question on different variations, heat map them, and look at recordings. So the ability for you to see, like, feel the pulse on your variation, to again empathize with how the experience or how the behavior changed is incredibly powerful, right? Hopefully you already had the hypothesis before you did the test, so quickly you're going to very quickly see if you're kind of changing behavior or if you're actually having any impact whatsoever with your hypothesis. Does that answer your question?
Of course. So let's check if we have other questions. I must remind to all the attendees that if they ask questions, they can win a huge account to Omniconvert. So mainly they'll be able to test for 12 million people. So
can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Actually, I saw a question from Tapido now, I hope I pronounced that well. He said, my developers say Hotjar slowed down the performance of the site. How true is this? So while it's possible that something might go wrong and it might slow down your site like anything else, Hotjar is designed to not slow down your site. So if it is, just contact us, reach out on within the app or on Twitter, and we can look into it. But be careful of certain tools. There are many tools out there, and I think this is for any company with a script. So Valentin, maybe you had the same experience. There are tools out there that measure speed by literally measuring like when the loading stops, which is stupid, right? Because in essence, you want to see the experience to the user. So scripts like Hotjar and many other, I think even, well, it depends, I'm not going to state anything, but in many cases that like even Hotjar they're loaded in parallel, right? So even though the loading time technically of measuring it is might be longer by milliseconds, the experience to the user is unchanged because the site loads and then maybe Hotjar might load for a millisecond more afterwards.
Yeah, that we've had the same questions for Omniconvert and mainly that's because people they are using tools to measure the last element that has been loaded. But nowadays, all the browsers are actually exposing you data, and what is important to measure is the loading of the first element. So when the first element is being shown. Okay, so David. Thanks a lot for your time and for
pleasure
your great
being here. It's a pleasure.
May we see each other at the next edition of International Ecommerce Day. Till then, guys, we'll have a 5 minutes break to grab some coffee or water, and we'll see each other with Johan van Tonder in room 1. He's going to talk about how to prioritize your A/B testing. Thanks again, David. See you guys later.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thanks.